Dr. Marissa May. In this video, we're going to look at solving trig equations. I'm going to start out with a basic equation, sine of x equals negative square root of 3 over 2. And then we'll do another one that requires you to do a little algebra first before you solve. So when I look at an equation such as this, I look at the value and I look at its sign. In this case, it is negative. So I'm asking myself, what quadrants is sine negative in? I like my students to remember that all students take calculus. And that's just an acronym to help them to remember the quadrants. To remember that all trig functions are positive in quadrant 1, sine and cosecant are positive in quadrant 2, tangent and cotangent are positive in quadrant 3, and then cosine and secant are positive in quadrant 4. Now, this helps us to remember which trig functions are positive in those quadrants. So that means everything else is negative. Okay, so we're looking for sine to be negative. Well, obviously that's not going to be in 1 because all trig functions are positive in quadrant 1. It's not going to be in 2 because that's where sine is positive. So we know we're working in quadrants 3 and 4. So our next step, now that we've decided which quadrants we need to be working in, we're going to draw it in quadrant 3. And what do I mean draw it? I'm going to draw a representative or a reference triangle. And I know that sine is opposite over hypotenuse, or y over r. So I'm going to label the y, or the opposite side of this triangle, as negative square root of 3. I'm going to label the hypotenuse as 2. So what is the missing side? Well, the missing side is negative 1. And it's negative because we're in quadrant 3. So now that we have our reference triangle, we need to ask ourselves, what's the reference angle? Well, across from the square root of 3 in our 30, 60, 90 triangle is the 60-degree angle. So our reference angle now is 60. What is our full angle? Well, that would be the angle that comes all the way from 0 to this reference angle. We would add 180 plus 60 to get that measurement, which would be 240. If we're asked to answer in radians, I would answer with 4 pi over 3. That's just one of the answers. Now, remember, we were looking in quadrants 3 and 4, so now we need to go find the angle in 4. We'll do it the same way. Draw your reference triangle. Label the sides of your triangle, opposite hypotenuse. Missing side here is positive 1, but the reference angle, which is what we're looking for, is 60. Did you notice the reference angle is the same for both of them? That's important because that happens all the time. All right? So how do we find this angle? That's where we do 360 minus our 60. And we get 300. Or if we were asked for radians, we would answer with 5 pi over 3. So I want you to see that there are two answers. Either we answer with x equals 240 and 300 if we're asked for degree measurement, or we answer with 4 pi over 3 and 5 pi over 3. And again, this is assuming we only want answers within the first revolution of the unit circle. Realize we could keep going around the unit circle and get more and more answers to this equation. But for the most part, generally you're going to be looking for that first time around the unit circle to find these solutions. Now let's turn our attention to a little bit more complicated equation with trig functions. And again, we're still trying to solve, but this one's a little bit more involved than our previous one, where our previous one had just like sine of x equals a number. So I want you to see that both of these terms have a cosine in it. So our first step here is going to be to factor out that cosine of x. Much like we would a greatest common factor. So now what is left? If we take out a cosine of x here, we would have a 2 cosine of x. Minus, if we take out a cosine here, we would have a 1 left over. Now a little algebra here. We're going to set the cosine of x equal to 0. And we're going to set that parentheses equal to 0. Now let's work with the cosine of x being 0 first. First of all, because it equals 0, we know this lands on an axis of the unit circle. So we're not going to land in a quadrant. We know that cosine is x over r. And in the unit circle, r is always 1. So now we know x is 0. So when we're on the unit circle, where are the points where x is 0? We'd have to be on the y-axis, right? We'd have to be here at 0, 1, or here at 0, -1. Okay, so what are those angles that get us to that measurement? Well, if we start here and we go to this angle, that would be 90 degrees. So we know one of our answers here is 90 degrees. Now, to start over here at 0 and go all the way around to get to this bottom location, that bottom coordinate, that would be 270 degrees. So we know that cosine is 0 at 90 degrees and at 270. Now, if you're asked to write that in radians, of course you would write that as pi over 2 and 3 pi over 2. All right, now let's turn our attention to the second one. Now this one, we want to solve it for cosine. So I'm going to move the 1 over. 2 cosine of x equals 1. I've got cosine of x now equals 1/2 because I'm going to divide by 2. Now we know we're in a quadrant because it didn't equal 0. Now it equals a number. And so I need to know, where is cosine positive? Because remember, cosine is equal to positive 1/2. I need to know what quadrants does that happen in. Well, remember, all students take calculus. And I want to know where cosine is positive. So remember, everything's positive in 1, and cosine is positive in 4. So those are our 2 quadrants we're working in. Let's draw in 1 our reference triangle. Now remember, our cosine is adjacent over hypotenuse. So we're going to do adjacent is 1, hypotenuse is 2. So that means the other side is our square root of 3. So what's your reference angle? Your reference angle is opposite of the square root of 3, which has to be 60. Now the good news is in quadrant 1, the reference angle equals the angle, so we know 60 is one of our answers here. I'm going to write it down here. Okay? Now we need to do the same thing but for quadrant 4. So in quadrant 4, draw your reference triangle. Remember, adjacent is 1, hypotenuse is 2. So adjacent is 1, hypotenuse is 2. Opposite side is negative square root of 3. Reference angle then across from the negative square root of 3 is 60. And how do you get the angle when you have the reference angle? That's going to be your 360 minus 60, which gives you 300. Okay, so this equation actually has 4 answers. Let's put them all together. We've got that x can be 90, x can be 270, x can be 60, or x can be 300. And remember, those are just the answers on the first time around the circle. Now, if you're asked to write that in radians, then you would have answered with pi over 2, 3 pi over 2, pi over 3, and 5 pi over 3. So I hope this helps you with your trig equations. Really work through asking yourself those questions about which quadrant are you in first, or be looking for the trig functions that might be on an axis. So be sure to like and subscribe if you want more videos like this.